Senator J.D. Vance attempted to trap Representative Jasmine Crockett with a calculated political jab, but what he received was a raw, unfiltered truth he wasn't prepared to face. The hearing room buzzed with a low hum, not chaotic, but not silent, either the kind of tension that builds when cameras are live and every phrase could become tomorrow's news. The topic was federal housing reform, but for many in the room, it wasn't just about policy. It was about staking claims, about wielding influence. As Jasmine Crockett adjusted her microphone and leaned in, she understood the dynamics of the space. Opposite her sat Senator J.D. Vance, hair meticulously combed, tie subtly loosened for effect. He carried the self-assured posture of a politician convinced he held the intellectual high ground. Vance hadn't spoken yet, but his gaze was fixed on her, probing for a weak spot. Crockett wasn't about to give him one. Not yet. She came, armed. A binder packed with statistics, but more importantly, stories, names, and the faces of those who'd never sit at this table. She'd flown from Dallas the previous night, studying policy documents on the plane, forgoing the staff dinner. None of that was relevant now. It was time to act. Representative Barry Granger from Oregon was mid-speech when Vance began fidgeting. In his seat, signaling his intent. Granger droned on about modular homes and funding for innovation, but it was obvious Vance had other priorities. His eyes darted toward Crockett, and when Granger wrapped up, Vance raised his hand for the floor. "Madam, Chair," he said with a polished tone, "I'd like to pose a question to Representative Crockett." In an instant, the room's focus shifted. Cameras pivoted, staffers glanced up. Vance's voice remained even. "You've advocated for more federal housing funds to improve conditions in places like Dallas," he started, "but how can you defend that when those cities are riddled with crime, mismanagement, and persistent homelessness under your watch? Doesn't more federal money just sustain failure?" There it was. A pointed jab, not loud but cutting, crafted to wound, to imply, your communities can't handle responsibility, to paint urban areas, especially black and brown ones, as irreparably flawed. He knew precisely what he was doing. For a moment, Crockett stayed still, unblinking. Then she reached for her water bottle, took a deliberate sip, and set it down. No smile, no raised voice, but her hand lingered near her binder, her voice calm and steady. "Senator." She said, "I'm pleased you asked." Heads lifted in the back. Her tone, quiet, composed, didn't mirror the attack, but it carried gravitas, as if she'd been ready for this moment her entire life. "I serve a district where people work double shifts yet can't cover rent, where schools have moldy ceilings and rat infestations, where families crowd two to a room not by choice but by necessity. You call it mismanagement. I call it neglect." She paused, not for theatrics but for impact. "The crime you mention, it didn't spring up on its own. It stems from a system that carved highways through our communities, locked us out of opportunities with redlining, then feigned shock when the fallout emerged." Her voice stayed level, but her words landed like stones. "And since you raised federal funds, let's be clear, Dallas contributes billions to the federal government annually. Our residents pay taxes. We're not begging for charity. We're claiming what's rightfully ours. You want accountability? Let's discuss where those funds actually end up." Vance shifted faintly. A subtle movement, not quite unease, but enough for Crockett to notice. She wasn't finished, but the moment to turn the tables was still ahead. Vance let out a brief, dry laugh, just enough to signal he was unfazed, but his fingers tapped the table once. He leaned forward, ready to strike again. "Representative," he said, maintaining his smooth delivery. "You bring up redlining and highways, but it's 2025. When do city leaders take ownership of today's problems? Or are we forever pointing fingers at history instead of solving the present?" A few in the room adjusted in their seats, not out of surprise. This was a familiar tactic, a politician demanding accountability, but only from one side, the kind of remark that earns cheers in a sympathetic crowd and quiet agreement elsewhere. But this wasn't that kind of room, and Crockett wasn't that kind of representative. She didn't waver. "You want to talk ownership?" she asked. "Let's do it." She opened her binder, pulling out a single page, text small and highlighted. She held it up, not for flair, but to show she wasn't just speaking. She had evidence. "This is a 2023 federal report. It reveals that states with the highest poverty rates are mostly rural. It shows that clean water, health care, and decent housing aren't just urban challenges. They're plaguing Appalachia, the Mississippi Delta, places like Ross County, Ohio." She locked eyes with him. "That's your state, isn't it?" He didn't respond. He didn't need to. "You want to discuss leadership? Let's go there. While you're scrutinizing urban officials, your own constituents live in trailers with black mold and no running water. Some lack reliable electricity, and you voted against legislation that could have helped them." Eyebrows lifted in the back. A staffer jotted notes swiftly. Vance adjusted his microphone. "With all due respect," he began, "those issues are intricate. A single bill can't fix rural poverty, and a single grant program can't resolve urban housing insecurity either," Crockett interjected, composed but firm. "But when you challenge the ability of leaders based on the zip codes they represent, particularly when those areas are home to people of color, you're not proposing solutions. You're sidestepping your own track record." There it was. No shouting, no need for it. The power was in her quiet delivery. A few younger aides leaned in, straining to hear every word. On Twitter, a thread was gaining traction. Someone had posted a 30-second clip with the caption, "Crockett came ready." But this wasn't about social media. This was about real people. People like Miss Leona in South Dallas, calling Crockett's office weekly for 3 months to navigate Section 8 paperwork. People like Carlos, a high school junior studying in his aunt's van between exams. People who never get a platform but bear the weight of policies crafted in rooms like this. Crockett reached into her folder again, this time pulling out a photo. Simple. A dilapidated 2-story house, paint peeling, roof caving, a blue tarp secured with bricks. She slid it toward the camera. "This is Chillicothe, Ohio, not Dallas. A 61-year-old woman named Terry lives here. Her heater failed 2 winters ago. She uses her oven to stay warm. Last month, she told a journalist, 'They always focus on cities in the news. No one checks on us.'" She glanced at Vance, her voice softening just a touch. "People like Terry and Miss Leona aren't rivals. But when you use hearings like this to pit urban against rural, that's the divide you foster." She leaned back. "I'm not here to put on a show. I'm here to get results." The pivotal moment, though, was still on its way. For a moment, J.D. Vance sat silent. He shifted in his chair, slightly, hinting at discomfort, but not conceding it. Someone coughed a few rows back. Crockett held her ground, letting the silence linger, her words hanging heavy longer than most politicians would allow. Then she leaned forward. "I won't act like cities are perfect," she said, her tone even, almost conversational. "We have issues. But let's be clear. Poverty isn't a personal failing. It's not about laziness or weak leadership. It's the outcome of policies, of choices made by people who never face the consequences." She opened her folder again, tidy, tabbed, color-coded. "I brought data, since folks love numbers from think tanks," she said, tapping the pages. "Let's look at evictions. Dallas has some of the highest rates, yes, but not because people refuse to pay. Wages haven't kept pace with rent. Median rent in my district is $1,350. A full-time minimum wage worker earns about $2,200 a month. Do the math." A soft murmur rippled from the back. Not cheers, but recognition. People crunching numbers mentally. The room's atmosphere began to shift. Not toward Crockett or against Vance, but toward the reality she was laying bare. And don't forget, she added, those families still lose utilities when they fall behind. Their kids get sick from mold. When they seek aid, they're waitlisted or turned away because federal funds are gone, redirected elsewhere to places that don't resemble them. She paused briefly. I've seen this up close, Crockett continued. I've lived parts of it. My mother worked days cleaning homes and nights stocking shelves. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted a roof that didn't leak and a doctor who didn't keep her waiting 6 weeks. Her voice remained steady, but it carried depth. She wasn't reading now. She was recalling. I attended a public high school that lost accreditation twice. The government's response: we'll review funding in 2 years. 2 years. That's a student's freshman and sophomore years lost. Try telling that to a parent whose child is already struggling. Vance glanced at his notes. Crockett saw it and pressed on. This hearing isn't about pointing fingers, she said. It's about resolve, whether we're committed to fixing problems or just winning debates. Because my constituents aren't watching C-SPAN for political points. They're checking if their housing voucher was approved. Senator Pauline Marks, 3 seats away, scribbled in her notebook's margins. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. The room's energy was shifting. And Crockett wasn't nearly done. Since we're on responsibility, she said, turning a page, let's not pretend urban areas collapse on their own. Ever heard of the urban renewal programs from the 1950s and 60s? Federal policy, demolished. Entire neighborhoods ran highways through black communities, displaced families with no support, and called it progress. The result? Decades of housing instability. She leaned in, her voice quieter, drawing listeners closer. We didn't wield the blade, but we've been wounded ever since. The room fell silent, a mix of introspection and tension. Crockett wasn't attacking. She was bearing witness. And Vance, for once, didn't interject. But what she said next would put him squarely on the defensive. Crockett closed her binder, no longer needing it. What followed came not from reports or briefs, but from lived experience and sharp precision. Senator, here's what bothers me, she said, eyes fixed on him. This idea that poverty is only urban, tall buildings, broken pavement, graffiti, that when black and brown people struggle, it's bad leadership, but when white rural families face hardship, it's a national emergency. No one says they failed. People say the system let them down. She paused, letting the words sink in. I visited places like Athens County and Jackson Township, she went on, naming Ohio regions unfamiliar to many in the room, not for cameras or clout, but because poverty is poverty, whether in East Dallas or a trailer park near Zanesville. You say city leaders must step up, but what about rural representation? What's your role? Her words were deliberate, not loud, but relentless. Vance exhaled sharply and shifted again. With all due respect, he started, but she cut through. No, let's talk about respect, she said. I'm exhausted by people coming to these hearings, taking swipes at mayors, organizers, and single parents, then voting against bills that could help your own constituents. She leaned forward, gripping the mic. I reviewed your voting history last night. You rejected the Rural Housing Stability Assistance Program, which would have funded repairs for low-income rentals, supported homeless veterans in small towns, and provided transitional housing for families displaced during the pandemic. You said no. Her gaze didn't waver. You speak of the American dream fading in the heartland, but when your people can't pay heating bills, you blame red tape. When they overdose in a parking lot, you blame culture. When solutions are proposed, you call it government overreach. Soft. Gasps echoed in the room. Let me be crystal clear, she said. I'm not exploiting their struggles. I'm recognizing them because those people deserve better too. But if we're going to act like one form of poverty is a political problem and another is a rallying cry, we're not serious about progress. We're just perpetuating prejudice. Vance reached for his pen, hesitated, then set it down. He glanced at the chairwoman, hoping for an interruption. None came. Crockett wasn't done. I met a man in Jackson, Ohio, named Ronnie, 71, a retired steelworker. His pension vanished when his company collapsed. He survives on peanut butter, canned beans, and what's left of his Social Security. He said he's too proud to beg and too weary to fight. But one thing was clear. He didn't care who fixed things. He just wanted to stay warm in February. She paused. Ronnie's story isn't far from many I know back home, but we speak of people like him with empathy, while people like mine face skepticism. The room wasn't tense anymore. It was still. She leaned back, hands clasped. To craft housing policy that works, she said softly, we must stop dividing. Rural versus urban, white versus black, deserving versus reliant. Those aren't real divides. They're political tactics. No one interrupted, not even the chairwoman. But Crockett wasn't finished. She was about to make it deeply personal. Crockett looked down briefly, not at notes or her binder, just collecting herself. When she looked up, the mood shifted. She wasn't arguing now. She was reflecting. I don't often share this in hearings, she began, because getting personal risks being dismissed or weaponized. But today, I'll tell you something. She edged closer to the mic. When I was 13, we were evicted. My mom worked 6 days a week. My dad had just lost his job at an auto shop. One day, we came home from school, and our belongings were on the lawn. Couch, boxes, our TV, all of it, like it meant nothing. My little brother thought we were moving. He didn't grasp what was happening. The room grew hushed. Not courteous quiet, but a heavy, profound silence. Even Vance kept his eyes on her. We stayed with my aunt for 2 weeks, then a neighbor for 3. That was when I learned how fragile security is. You think you're fine until you're not. You believe hard work ensures safety until the eviction. Notice arrives. She took a breath. We eventually moved into a small apartment. My mom refused to call it the bad part of town. She said, it's not bad. It's ours for now. A staffer across the room set her pen down gently. Years later, Crockett continued, I became a public defender. One of my first clients was a woman charged with trespassing. Not because she was trespassing, but because she and her 2 kids were living in an abandoned house. She cleaned offices at night, got her kids to school each morning, but with no legal address, she was a criminal. She paused, her throat catching briefly. Sitting across from her, I thought, if one thing had gone differently, that could have been me. Same determination, same exhaustion, same spark in her eyes. No one looked away. This is why I fight so fiercely, why I bring data and names. People don't live in spreadsheets. They live in neighborhoods, motel rooms, bus stops, and cars that should have been scrapped years ago. Vance sat motionless, hands still on his notes. And I don't resent rural communities, she said. I've traveled through your counties, Senator. I've stopped at gas stations with bare shelves, seen kids walking miles to catch a school bus. You think I don't see their struggles? You think my fight for urban housing blinds me to that? She shook her head. That's our mistake, letting these false divides obscure the truth. Poverty doesn't care about your state or your vote. It strikes just the same. Her voice softened, but her resolve held. After our eviction, my mom told me, never let them make you feel ashamed of what you survived. That stayed with me. Every time someone belittles a struggling family, or uses them as a political jab, I hear her voice. She looked toward the cameras, not Vance or the panel. When someone labels public housing a failure, I see my brother asleep on a couch in someone else's living room. When they say people just need to work harder, I think of my mom's blistered feet from scrubbing floors at 3 a.m. She squared her shoulders. This isn't theoretical for me. It's my life, and the lives of millions who can't afford to be here. So, if you're going to challenge their value, be ready for someone to stand up and respond. While the hearing room stayed quiet, the outside world was erupting. By the time the session ended, a clip had already reached 3 million views. It began as a 47-second video shared by a junior staffer on their personal account. Just Crockett's closing lines on eviction, shame, and dignity. No edits, no soundtrack, just her voice, her face, and the room's silence, which spoke louder than any campaign ad. Within an hour, a Columbus news outlet reposted it, captioned, "J.D. Vance challenged Jasmine Crockett. He wasn't prepared." From there, it spread rapidly. On TikTok, young users wove their stories into the clip, nodding as she spoke, eyes teary, faces set. Others shared tales of eviction, sleeping on couches or dodging police during housing sweeps. They weren't debating policy. They were remembering. On Twitter, hashtags like Not Your Crockett Response and Indu Truth Spoken trended within hours. An Ohio housing nonprofit shared the video, noting, "We've waited years for someone to say this so clearly." By evening, news anchors were reciting her words. No network overlooked it. Some called it a showdown, others a revelation. Despite varying spins, one truth held. Crockett had reshaped the conversation. Vance's team scrambled, posting a statement on his website just before midnight. "We all aim to uplift those we represent, urban, rural, and beyond. While I differ with Representative Crockett's approach, I admire her fervor. It was bland, cautious, neither confrontational nor apologetic. It fell flat." Comments below flooded with Crockett's quotes, her stats, her stories. One user wrote, "She brought evidence. He brought rhetoric." In Dallas, Crockett's office, phones rang nonstop, callers expressed gratitude. One woman left a tearful voicemail. "I never thought Congress understood what losing a home feels like." Surprisingly, it wasn't just city dwellers responding. Messages came from Chillicothe, Circleville, Portsmouth, towns Vance had easily won in his last election. A rural Ohio veteran wrote, "Her politics aren't mine, but she nailed the housing issues here were overlooked." 2 days later, Crockett sat with her staff in a cramped Dallas office, walls covered with letters and printouts. Some came from teens, one from a retired pastor who'd never voted Democrat but said he'd reconsidered. Yet she didn't celebrate. "This isn't a victory," she told them. "It's a wake-up call." Her staffer, Devin, asked, "A wake-up? Call for what?" "That we shouldn't need a viral clip for people to value our stories," she replied. "They should have cared when Miss Leona called us 6 months ago, or when Ronnie lost his pension. No cameras were there then." A staffer asked if they should draft thank you replies to the letters. "We will," she said, "but we're also finalizing that new housing bill, one with real impact." The room fell silent. Outside, pundits dissected every moment. Analysts speculated about Crockett's future. Some saw her running statewide, others called her too blunt for the Senate. Her focus didn't waver. There was work to be done. The deeper truth, though, was still unfolding, and it went beyond politics. A week later, the buzz had faded. Headlines shifted, a tech firm collapsed, a senator made an odd podcast remark. But for those who truly heard Crockett, her words lingered, quietly persistent. This wasn't just a retort or a Capitol Hill highlight. That hearing touched something profound, rarely voiced. The housing fight isn't just about budgets. It's a reflection of who and what we deem worthy of saving. It's simple to trade stats behind microphones, to preach personal accountability, or bootstrap solutions when issues feel distant. But Crockett made it real, not just her story, but everyone's. At its core, her message was stark. This nation doesn't view all pain equally. A working-class white man in rural Ohio is forgotten. A working-class black woman in South Dallas is a failure. One gets sympathy, the other blame. That's not policy. It's prejudice. This bias shapes every funding choice, zoning rule, and news story about who earns help and who squanders it. Crockett didn't argue urban struggles trump rural ones. She said both need focus, both need resources, and neither should be pitted against the other for political points. She also revealed a truth rarely acknowledged. Many lawmakers rely on these divides. If rural Ohio's poor see themselves in South Dallas's poor, the game shifts. Tough questions arise. People at the bottom start demanding the same answers, and power structures wobble. That's why moments like this hearing resonate, not for going viral, but for exposing reality. They reveal who speaks up when it's tough, who embraces discomfort, who prioritizes truth over image. A lesser-known moment occurred the day after the hearing. Crockett flew home, seated in row 27's middle seat between a Little Rock teacher and a Pittsburgh contractor. No one knew her. The teacher read, the contractor napped. Over Missouri, the teacher asked, "You live in D.C.?" Crockett smiled. "I work there sometimes." The woman nodded. "It's noisy there." "Too noisy at times," Crockett said, "but I try to speak for those without a voice." The teacher eyed her, then said, "If you're fighting for folks who can't afford first class, you're in the right seat." They shared a quiet laugh. Nothing grand, but it meant more to Crockett than any headline. She fought for them, not just voters or donors, but those in economy class struggling to stay afloat, wondering if D.C. noticed them. She'd admit she's not flawless, but she doesn't shy from truth. In a room of posturing, that stood out. The hearing didn't overhaul the system, but it loudly reminded people their stories matter, that someone sees them. Sometimes that's the spark. Before we wrap up, here's what Crockett wanted everyone to hold on to. A week post-hearing, Crockett stood outside a modest community center in Lancaster, Texas. No press, no cameras, just folding chairs, clipboards, and locals asking about rent aid, code enforcement, and a potential housing pilot. A man in his late 60s, in a worn Dallas Cowboys jacket and work boots, raised his hand. He didn't ask about laws or budgets. "Do they hear you when you speak like that up there?" Crockett paused, looking at him, then at the others, likely, wondering the same. "Not always," she said, "but I don't speak to make them comfortable. I speak so you don't feel unseen." That was the heart of it. The hearing wasn't about embarrassing Vance or chasing virality. The victory was people hearing their lives reflected in a place they never expected. A congresswoman who'd walked their path, not pretending, just speaking truth. Politics isn't just laws. It's memory, whose reality is believed, whose pain is affirmed, whose strength is overlooked. When Crockett shared her eviction story, or mentioned Terry in Ohio and Ronnie with his space heater, she wasn't acting. She was documenting lives, saying, "These people are real. Their struggles aren't random. Their poverty isn't trivial. Whether you're in a South Dallas apartment or a trailer near Athens, your life should matter. Fully, equally, no. Exceptions." Her message hit hard, not for drama, but for its raw honesty, unsoftened by spin or buried in statements. We need more of that, not just in Congress, but everywhere decisions are made. More voices saying, "This system's broken, and I won't pretend it's not." We must stop acting like working-class pain is only valid when it suits a narrative. There's no right struggle. Whether from a housing project or a rural valley, you know what it's like to do everything right and still fall short. If this story resonates, if it reminds you of your life, your family, your past, you get why that hearing mattered. You may never have held a mic or stood in a grand hall with cameras, but you've lived the real parts. Late rent, space heaters, the dread of a yellow envelope on your door. Maybe you've waited years to hear someone say these things in a place too proud or political to admit them. That's why Crockett's story counts. Not because she said it perfectly, but because she voiced what many can't. So, if this moves. You don't stop here. Talk about it, share it, ask your representatives tough questions. Demand better, not just for your area, but for strangers in distant zip codes facing the same fight. Representation isn't a logo. It's a duty. Every time someone like Crockett speaks out, it reminds us truth still has a seat at the table. If that matters to you, subscribe, comment, share your story, and always remember, your voice matters, even when they act like it doesn't.